My daughter-in-law married my son just to claim my house. She showed up right after the wedding with, "My name is Beatrice, 73 years old. I spent my life working as a librarian in a small lakeside town called Ashbridge, where autumn leaves fall like rain and winters last longer than most folks are willing to admit. There's nothing remarkable about me. I've never traveled far. I'm not a good speaker, and I've never stood in front of a crowd demanding justice for myself. I'm the kind of woman people remember, with just a few words." She was kind, but sometimes it's the kind ones who are the easiest to forget. People get so used to them giving that they start to believe there's nothing they ever needed to keep for themselves. I'm not telling this story to complain. I'm telling it because I believe someone out there, someone like me, may have spent their whole life keeping a roof over everyone's head only to realize in the end they're the last one left under it. And no one asked them to stay. If you're still listening, maybe you know what that feels like. And if you don't, I hope this story helps you see. Sometimes silence doesn't mean weakness. It means someone is quietly getting ready for something that matters. Like I did the first time I stood up, not to go anywhere but to stop being pushed. She showed up less than 48 hours after the wedding, and in her hands, not a suitcase, but a stack of documents. I was tidying up the kitchen when I heard a car pulling up on the gravel drive. It was early afternoon. Soft sun still spilling down. A few chrysanthemums had just started to bloom on the porch. The squirrels were out like always, picking at the crumbs I left behind. I wasn't expecting anyone, least of all them. The sound of heels on the old wooden steps, sharp, deliberate. I wiped my hands on the apron and opened the door. There stood Owen, still with that sheepish stance, and Tessa, the new daughter-in-law, in a fitted dress, hair pinned high, makeup so subtle it screamed effort. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice soft like wet paper. "We're just dropping by real quick." I nodded.
Come in.
The kitchen, already quiet, suddenly felt smaller. I caught Owen glancing toward the backyard like he was trying to avoid my eyes. Tessa pulled out a chair and placed the folder on the table. "I just want you to feel secure about the future," she said. "So, there are a few papers to sign just to help us get organized." I sat across from her, smoothing out the tablecloth. The first page was a temporary power of attorney. The second update of fixed assets following marriage printed in bold. I didn't say a word, just stood up and quietly put the kettle on. Steam rose, fogging the kitchen window. On the radio, an old tune played, the kind I used to shelf records for back when I worked at the public library. I remembered the day Owen got his scholarship. I sold nearly 300 rare books just to afford his flight to Oregon. I was younger then. I thought that if I stayed silent, gave enough, people would understand. Now I know better. We know we can take care of ourselves. Tessa was still speaking. "But later down the line, if anything happens to you, it's better if the paperwork's already clear." I placed a cup of tea in front of her. My hand trembled slightly, but my gaze stayed calm. "I'm not dead yet," I said slowly. "And I'm not senile enough to need someone else deciding what happens to my house." The air thinned for a beat. Tessa smiled, lifting the cup. "Of course, I just wanted you to have time to look everything over."
She took a sip.
"I'll go grab the appendix. We left it in the trunk." I nodded, not watching her leave. When the door closed, I picked up the folder, turned each page carefully. My eyes stopped on a line near the end. Reallocation of personal property ownership under Addendum B. Marital party may represent on behalf. I didn't feel angry, not even hurt. It was more like something stirred inside. A faint knock on a long-closed door. The name came to me, Calhoun. That was my great-grandmother's maiden name. The Calhouns lived north of the lake. Used to own the biggest apple orchard in Ashbridge. But what I remember isn't the trees. It's what she used to say. Sometimes people don't need the key. They just need to believe they can open the door. I've ignored a lot of knocks on my door over the years. Holidays, Owen would bring girlfriends over, eat, then leave. Other times, like when I sold our old house to pay off my husband's hospital bills. No one asked what I thought. I believe it was just what mothers do. Tessa came back in under 3 minutes, still smiling, this time with a thicker folder. As she stepped inside, she said, like it just occurred to her, "Oh, one more small thing I forgot about the name on the deed. I heard the chair legs slide faintly as she sat. Right now, the house is still in your name, she said. But since you're not planning on going anywhere, we figured maybe it's time the name reflected that. I looked up straight into her eyes. That sentence wasn't courteous anymore. It wasn't thoughtful. It was a sentence meant to crack open the mask she'd been wearing. Owen still said nothing. He stared at the floor, fingers tracing the rim of his teacup, waiting maybe for someone to knock so he'd have a reason to leave. I exhaled, not with anger, but with clarity. The kind you feel when you wipe a window clean and finally see who's been looking in. This girl, I thought she didn't come to ask. She came to try her luck. The house I'd lived in for 11 years, a 2-story wooden home, pointed roof, warm kitchen that smelled like toast every morning. To her, it was just a line item in a post-marital asset reallocation. And me, probably just a footnote. I stood up, walked to the shelf, and took down another cup, my hands steady. What ran through my mind wasn't rage. It was a question. If someone's been quiet for that long, can they speak just cold enough to make others back off? I poured myself some tea and returned to the table. Tessa was still talking something about asset oversight protections, but I'd stopped listening. I looked at her closely, as if memorizing the face of a person who wasn't family, but a guest who'd walked in and assumed they could rearrange everything in the room. I smiled and slid the cold tea back across the table. I think I'll need more time to consider, but in my mind, I'd already started thinking about the name Calhoun. Faye once said, "Don't wait until they've locked the door to ask for the key back." But the truth is, I don't think I ever held the key to begin with. Her words made me pause for a moment, eyes tracing the tiny cracks along my coffee cup. After all these years, Lakeview Diner still had the same honey-colored wooden booths and faded red curtains with those tiny flower prints. We sat at the corner table where the late afternoon sun filtered through the glass, falling like golden dust on the table. Faye took a sip of her coffee and winced. "Last time you said they were acting normal. Now they're showing up with papers. Did you sign anything yet?" I shook my head. Not fast, not slow. Good, because once you sign, the polite tone disappears real quick. Faye used to teach biology at Owen's old high school. Her hair is short now, snow white, but her voice still carries that edge that used to make students sit up straight. Her daughter, Rachel, once drained her retirement fund in a way far more subtle than Tessa ever could. So, I understood her reaction. I told Faye the basics, the folder, Tessa's words, Owen's eyes avoiding mine. I didn't want to make it a big deal, but Faye wasn't going to let me off easy. "You need to see Calhoun." I looked at her, caught off guard. "I thought he retired." "He's still working. His name's still on the firm. Just go. Not to sue anyone, just to find out what's still in your name." I didn't answer right away. Something in me sank. The name Calhoun stirred something else. I remembered the day my husband died. Me signing over documents, never asking a question. Even when I sold the old house to cover the hospital bills, I just followed what the bank's accountant told me. Maybe I've lived an entire life without asking anything. Not about rights, not about choices. Fa nudged the dessert plate toward me.
Eat.
"You look like you're about to keel over." I picked up my fork, smiled faintly, but my hand couldn't lift it. We sat quietly for a while. Just the soft clink of spoons and cups, and the radio playing a tune from the 50s.
It was only you.
I remembered hearing it on my first date with my husband. Back then, we had nothing, just 2 bikes and a few coins in our pockets. But I still remember what it felt like to be waited for. Now, I don't think anyone's waiting for me. Lorna, the older waitress, walked by and said softly, "Mrs. Beatrice, I heard Tessa bragging at the salon the other day, said the house was going to be in her name soon." Said it like it was already done. Fa turned to me, one eyebrow raised. "You hear that?" I nodded. I heard, but I wasn't angry. I just found it funny because I hadn't said a word, and yet she'd gone around talking like it was already hers. I went home slowly, like I always did in the evenings. But when I stepped into the study, the little room off the first floor where I kept my old encyclopedias and papers, I paused. A thought came to me. I'd once kept a copy of the will somewhere. I opened the second cabinet to the left, pulled out an old wooden box. There were letters from Owen sent from summer camp in 7th grade, some black and white photos, and then a cream envelope labeled Beatrice, 2017. I sat down and opened it. It was the will I drew up after my husband passed. One line stood out. Any property in my name, including the house at 82 Lakeview Road, shall transfer to heirs only upon my death. I read it twice, not skimming like I usually did. I read every word slowly, because for the first time I was reading to understand what was mine, not for anyone else. I don't know how long I sat there. The desk lamp cast a soft yellow light across the paper. My shadows stretched long across the floor. The words were plain, dry legal language, but to me they felt like chapters of a life I'd never really claimed. Each clause was a cut, reminding me how many times I'd signed things that had nothing to do with me. Permission slips, hospital mortgages, waivers for sick days to care for Owen. Never once did I read the fine print because I thought it was my job to step back, to understand, to give everything for the family. Now I wondered, had anyone ever asked what I wanted? The clock chimed 7. Wind rushed through the pines outside the window. I left the study, went upstairs to the kitchen, turned on the light, and reached for the kettle. By habit, I reached for the jasmine tea, the one I drink every night, but stopped. My eyes drifted to the shelf on the left. There it was, a bottle of red wine, sitting there since 2015, the year my husband died. I'd saved it for a special occasion. But in 9 years, I never opened it because no day ever felt special enough. No birthdays, no anniversaries, no dinner warm enough to call for wine. I stepped over, pulled out the cork. The soft pop echoed in the quiet kitchen. I poured a glass. The wine, deep red, shimmered like thin blood beneath the light. I took a sip, then sat down, placing the glass on the table. Staring out the window, my reflection looked back at me, small, silent, but not blurry anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed Faye. She answered fast, her voice still fuzzy. Hello. I only said one thing. Are you free tomorrow? I need you to come with me to see Calhoun. There was a pause, then a small cough from her end. Yeah, what time? 9 a.m., I said. All right, I'll drive. I hung up, looked back at the half-empty glass of wine, then at the folder Tessa had left, still sitting there on the table, untouched. I closed it. Tonight, I wouldn't make tea. I opened the red wine, the one I'd been saving since the day my husband died. Mischief. Calhoun still wore his hair slicked back and spoke like he was reading an inscription on a tombstone. I used to find that irritating. Today I didn't. The second-floor office in the old red brick building looked just the same. It smelled of old paper and cheap floor cleaner. The brass nameplate reading Gerald T. Calhoun was tarnished now, quiet and still like the man it belonged to. I pushed open the door. A draft slipped in through the cracked window, carrying the November chill. Faye walked beside me, silent. We waited nearly 5 minutes before Calhoun stepped out from the back, brown suit, thick folder in hand, eyes flicking through silver-rimmed glasses, as if he already knew I'd come back. I still have your file, he said, shaking my hand. Firm, not warm, but steady. The 2017 file. You're still the sole legal owner of the house on Lakeview Road. I nodded. Good. Calhoun glanced at Faye, then at me, waiting to see if I wanted her included. I gave a small nod. You said you wanted to update. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper handwritten last night. I want to revoke all previous powers of attorney. And, if possible, create a living trust. I've read about it. His eyebrows lifted. A personal trust. You've read thoroughly. I have. He sat down, opened my old file. The sound of paper flipping filled the room, soft, steady. Part of me found comfort in it. It reminded me of the old library where I used to work back when the only sounds were turning pages and quiet breathing. A living trust is fine, he said. But you'll need to name a successor trustee, someone to manage things after you're gone. Usually a family member. I looked up. What if I want to leave the house to the town? He held my gaze for a moment, didn't dismiss it, then asked, in what form, as a community legacy or a maintenance trust? Say, To convert it into a private library, a heritage home, or public property. I spoke slowly. I'm not certain yet, but I want one thing clear. This house is not to be fought over, not to be sold, not to be split 3 ways. Calhoun nodded. Understood. Faye sat beside me, smiling faintly, eyes steady on mine. I didn't look back, but I knew what she was thinking. I turned to Calhoun again. I want a printed copy on linen paper in large print with space for a signature right on the front page.
He chuckled for the first time since we arrived.
I see. So, no one signs it with a shaky hand or misses what they're agreeing to. I didn't smile, just nodded. He began typing, keys tapping in rhythm. Each stroke felt like a weight lifting. Not quite peace, but the quiet opening of a door, a sense that light was waiting on the other side. We sat for over an hour. Calhoun didn't rush, didn't make small talk. Every so often, he'd glance up to ask, "Are you certain you want to keep this clause?" Or, if the beneficiary contests the terms, "Do you want to revoke their rights entirely?" Each time I nodded, no hesitation. I'd already done the thinking. All those years sitting back while others decided for me, clearing the dishes while the rest of the family left for vacation, answering the phone only to hand it to my son when someone called about a job. While I stayed behind, sweeping up the thank yous. Today, I wanted everything printed clearly. Not because I feared being cheated, but because I feared forgetting. That once I claimed something as my own, Fa watched from across the room, her hand resting lightly on her purse. I knew what she was remembering. That time Rachel, her daughter, tricked her into signing over power of attorney, then sold her apartment to fund stock trading. Faye lost everything. She never sued. "It's still my daughter," she'd said. I used to think I understood that feeling. Now I'm not so sure. Calhoun looked up one final time. "Mrs. Beatrice, if I may suggest one more clause." I raised my hand gently. "I want this in writing. If any beneficiary, no matter who, attempts to challenge the terms of this trust, they forfeit everything, no exceptions." He paused, then scribbled a note. "All right, I'll include that. Though you should know, if taken to court, it can still be contested." "I understand. And you still want it in?" "Yes." I didn't waver. For the first time in years, my words didn't need approval. When the first printed copy arrived, thick pages, heavy paper, large type, just as I'd asked, I signed the first page. My hand didn't shake. On our way out, Fa stayed quiet. We walked down the creaking stairs, each step echoing beneath us. The cold wind slammed in from the front door, a reminder that November in Michigan is never gentle. I stepped outside. The wind bit at my coat, but it didn't sting the way it used to. I thought to myself, maybe I'm not too late. Maybe there's still time to write my own story before someone else writes it for me. She thought I didn't know, but the truth is I was only waiting for the right moment to show her. Sometimes when someone stays quiet long enough, people start thinking they're mute. I rested my hand on the checkered tablecloth, washed, ironed, laid out flat. Lunch was simple. Chicken soup, 2 slices of toast, a plate of cut fruit, no wine, no flowers, not a celebration, just a meal. But I set 3 full place settings, a final gesture of courtesy. Outside, the wind tapped through bare branches. The sky had turned a dull gray since morning. I heard the car pull up right on time. Footsteps on the wooden porch. Then Tessa's voice, soft but strained. "Mum. We're coming in." "Okay." I opened the door. She wore a long brown coat, hair pinned neatly, face lightly made up. Owen stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. "Come in," I said, then turned and walked back inside. They sat. I ladled soup into each bowl. My hands didn't shake. "Thank you, Mom," Tessa said gently. "Actually, we didn't just come to eat. There's something I wanted to say from the heart." I sat down, poured myself some tea.
I didn't offer any.
The teapot touched the table with a steady sound. "I know after the wedding, maybe things moved a little fast. We've thought about it a lot, and we just want what's best for you." "Really? It's natural that the house is still in your name. But you don't need to worry about that stuff anymore, do you?" I looked her in the eye. No nod, no response. Owen sipped his soup, an excuse not to meet anyone's gaze. Tessa continued, her tone smoother now. I spoke to a lawyer just generally, no names. They said, if you could give me power of attorney, I could manage things for you. Taxes, repairs, paperwork. You wouldn't have to stress about anything. I reached into the side drawer, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it in the center of the table. No decoration, no seal, just a plain yellow envelope with a small letter beyond the corner. Tessa's hand paused over her spoon. What's this? I took a sip of tea, let the warmth loosen my tongue, then said calmly, it's the full set of updated documents. It includes the living trust, the revocation of all previous authorizations, and a few new clauses. I saw a lawyer last week. No spoon dropped, but none needed to. Tessa blinked, her smile thinned. You actually did that? I didn't answer right away. I placed my cup down, sat up straighter. I didn't plan to. I already did. Owen set his spoon down, looked at me confused. Why didn't you tell me? I met his eyes. You never asked. He looked down, probably trying to recall whether he ever truly had. Tessa kept her composure, but her fingers were tight around the teacup handle. Her eyes no longer soft, just something colder now, something collapsing. I took one sheet from a folder, turned it face up, and slid it toward them. This is the updated ownership declaration. It clearly states the house is private property, not subject to joint inheritance and not under anyone else's authority. Tessa let out a quiet breath. I don't understand. What do you mean? I was just trying to help. I tilted my head. If you were really trying to help, you wouldn't have bragged at the salon that your name would soon be on the deed. She froze.
Who? Who told you that?
I have ears and I have friends. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse, didn't scold. I just set each piece of truth back where it belonged, like putting together a puzzle long assumed lost. Silence. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock. I stood up, walked to the mantel, took another envelope, this one thinner, handwritten, verified by Calhoun. Inside, it detailed my final decision that this home would be given to the Ashbridge Preservation Trust after I'm gone, and that no one would have the right to live here until then. I returned to the table, opened the paper, and read it aloud. Each word, each line felt like the voice of a woman who had been silent for far too long. This house will be transferred to the Ashbridge Preservation Trust. Upon my passing, until that day, no one but me is allowed through that gate. Tessa stilled. Owen looked at her, lips parted like he wanted to ask something, but didn't. No one said a word. I sat back down, poured myself more tea, and didn't offer any.
The steam rose slowly.
Tessa stood, eyes brimming. But I knew those weren't tears of sorrow. They were the tears of someone who just lost a game they thought was already won. I used to think keeping my son close was a kind of victory. But some things, the longer you hold on to them, the more they hurt. I opened the kitchen cabinet and took down the sea green teapot, the one with the chipped glaze and loose lid. I wrapped it in a towel, placed it in a cardboard box lined with old newspaper. One box, then two. There wasn't much to bring, just a few cookbooks, 2 thick wool sweaters, and an old photo frame from the summer of 1989. The year Owen left for college, and I still had enough black hair to tie in a neat bun. F.A. bent down, carefully wrapping the porcelain cups. You taking the radio? I shook my head. Leave it. Let the house keep a little memory. She didn't say anything more, just looked at me for a moment, not with pity, but with a kind of knowing that needs no explanation. By late afternoon, I buttoned my gray coat to the collar. Calhoun had asked me to meet at the usual office, second floor, still the red brick building. I carried a worn leather purse. Inside it, a paper I'd read at least a dozen times over the past few days. The room hadn't changed. The smell of old wood and ink. On the desk, a thick folder already marked and ready. Calhoun stood when I entered. Miss Beatrice, everything's prepared. I sat down. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but because I knew this would be the last thing I ever signed for myself. He walked me through each page, reading every clause aloud like I'd never seen them. But I didn't need to hear. I'd already read them all with my eyes, with my memory, with all the years of not being heard. "This is the final page," he said. "Once you sign, the house will be held in the Preservation Trust. Ownership transfers after your passing. Until then, full residency remains with you." I picked up the pen. The letters formed slowly, steadily.
Done.
Calhoun closed the folder and gave a single nod. "I'll send copies, digital and on linen stock." As requested, I stood. "Thank you. And thank you for not asking me why." He smiled gently. "I've seen too many people wait too long to do what they needed to do. You came earlier than most." On the way home, the snow hadn't started yet. The air was colder than yesterday, but the late light stretched gently across the rooftops. It was soft, like it was trying to hold on a little longer. When I reached the front steps, Noah's car was already parked outside. He stood on the porch holding a small wooden box. When he saw me, he lifted a hand and smiled. A few dry leaves clung to his coat. "I brought some plum cake. My mother still makes it every Thanksgiving. You said once you liked it." I invited him in. We sat at the kitchen table. Only one chair left now. I poured myself some tea. Noah didn't drink. He just set the box on the table, then pulled a folded flyer from his coat. "The church is hosting a Thanksgiving dinner this Thursday. Would you like to come? We have a table for those who aren't going with family." I looked at the paper, burnt red, printed with a maple leaf. Something so simple. It felt honest. "I'm not sure I feel thankful for anything right now." Noah nodded. "You can just come to sit in silence. No one needs to say a word." I smiled, folded the flyer, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Tessa said she'd return my old armchair. It didn't fit her aesthetic. Noah was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around the kitchen, the soft yellow lights, the old wooden shelves, the fogged-up window. I had taught Owen how to cook onion soup here. He used to stand between two stools, stirring the pot until his cheeks turned red. Now this kitchen no longer belonged to anyone. It was part of a different future, one where children would read, implant, and paint, just as the foundation proposal described. I turned back to Noah. "Thank you for not forgetting how to listen," he nodded. And in his eyes was something very still, as if all the noise in the world never had to be louder than a kind word. That evening, Owen called, his voice trembling on the line. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner." I stayed quiet. "Do you want to have dinner with me?"
Just us, no Tessa.
I thought of all the nights I'd left the house to pick him up from practice or brought him old gloves on the first snowy day. I thought of his eyes the day I moved out, blank, distant, like I was a temporary guest. I answered softly, like I had so many times in the quiet of my own heart. "You may need time to understand, but I don't need anything anymore. I just need peace." There was no reply. I hung up, stood, and looked around one last time. The house was half empty now, but my heart felt lighter. I put on my coat, picked up my small bag, and stepped outside. Calhoun had said he'd mail the official copy to my new address. I wasn't waiting. I only needed to know. Everything that needed doing had been done. As I turned and walked away from the law office, the first snow of the season began to fall. Soft, white, and not as cold as I'd imagined. I no longer had a house, but strangely, for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Without having to ask permission, Ashbridge Community Center was bright with sunlight that morning. Light poured through the tall windows, casting a warm amber glow across the tile floor. Inside, they were setting up more folding chairs around a round table covered in embroidered cloth. On the table sat 2 jugs of hot cocoa, a plate of butter cookies, and dozens of old, colorful books. I picked up a thin paperback, pages yellowed with time. The title read, "A Lantern in Her Hand." No one looked at me like I didn't belong. Maybe in this crowd, I was just another older woman, something I was never quite allowed to be in that house I left behind. Noah walked beside me, quiet as always, wearing a turtleneck sweater and a knit hat pulled low. Now and then he nodded to someone familiar, but mostly he just looked around like he was collecting memories one quiet moment at a time. "Would you like to sit?" he asked, gesturing to a row of chairs near the stage. I nodded. The chair creaked slightly as I sat, a sound that felt alive. From my coat pocket, I took out a book wrapped in newspaper, so old its spine was frayed. My husband had brought it home from his last business trip. Inside, a faint pencil note read, "For B, so the evenings won't feel so long anymore." I placed it in the donation box, not because I thought someone would read it, but because I wanted to leave behind something that wasn't just paper and wood. Nearby, a group of children laughed. The youngest hugged a comic book to their chest, eyes shining like they just found buried treasure. I remembered when Owen turned 7, the first time I took him to the library. He chose books by sniffing their spines, as if that was how you found the ones with magic. Back then, I thought that if I could just keep him close forever, I would win. Now I know holding on can be its own kind of suffocation if the other person doesn't truly want to stay. A soft knock. I turned. It was Owen standing just inside the doorway. He didn't call my name. He didn't step forward. He simply placed a cream envelope on the table near me, then stepped back. His face was half in shadow, but I saw the slight shift in his shoulders, a breath, or maybe an apology that never made it into words. I didn't open the letter. I slipped it into my coat pocket, like something I might read someday, or never, because what I'd been waiting for had already come, not in words, but in his willingness to remain outside. "You the one who donated that house?" A raspy voice asked beside me. I turned. An older woman, petite, silver hair nearly white, eyes sharp and bright. Her cane was carved with a star. "I gave my bakery to the youth center," she said with a grin. Whole town said I'd lost it, but I knew. There comes a time when you leave behind your voice, not your regrets. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. My granddaughter bakes just like I used to, except she adds cinnamon and ginger. I hate cinnamon. Every time I eat one of her cookies, I make a face, but I eat them anyway. I laughed for the first time that morning. Old music played from the back of the room, a violin softened by age paired with a piano light as breath. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. Nothing more to say, just to be. On stage, a speaker talked about the history of the building. Once a lakeside wooden cottage, now a gathering space for the town. Prescott Home for All Seasons, they called it. The name rang out, not like a tribute, but like a confirmation that I had existed, that some things silent are still remembered. A child ran past my feet, tripped on the rug, and burst into laughter. His mother bent to catch him, and they laughed together. I felt a knot in my throat, not from sadness, but from joy. Joy that something I'd let go of had made room for this laughter. Faye didn't come today. She'd called early in the morning. "I'm giving you space." When someone steps out of their shell, you don't pull them back. I wasn't sure if she meant Tessa or me, maybe both. I pulled the letter from my pocket, still unopened, but this time I placed it on the table next to my cup of cocoa. Then I stood and walked toward the door. The wind was gentle. Snow had started to fall lightly, dusting the red brick roof. I walked slowly past the newly painted porch to the far end of the garden where they had just put up a wooden sign carved deep into the grain. Prescott Home for All Seasons. Below it, a smaller line read, "Where no season is ever the same." I touched the wood. It was cold, but not as cold as I'd feared. Not like the nights I'd sat alone in the kitchen cooking for someone who wouldn't come home. I no longer had a house, but strangely, for the first time, I felt like I was somewhere without needing permission. No one called me mom. No one asked if they could have more soup, but the children still ran. One of them turned back, waving. "I love your house." And that was enough. I no longer live in the old two-story house in Ashbridge. That house has become a place for children's art classes, book clubs for the elderly, and winter community gatherings. Every time I walk past, I still recognize the old tiled roof and the rows of chrysanthemums I once planted with my own hands. But I no longer feel that it belongs to me. And strangely, I no longer feel pain because of that. I've moved into a small apartment behind the town church. Just a living room, a tiny kitchen, and a balcony big enough for 2 pots of geraniums. At first, I thought I would feel empty. But that emptiness gave me something I'd never had before, real quiet. Not the kind of silence that makes you feel forgotten, but the kind that lets you hear your own breath, the whistle of a kettle, and sometimes the soft tapping of your own heart. I started writing. Not a book, not a memoir, just small notes. The things I remember, the things I was afraid to forget, and the questions I never dared to say aloud. Each morning, I make a small pot of tea, turn on the radio, and write a few lines. Not to publish, just to remind myself that I still have the right to tell my story in my own way. Noah stops by every weekend. He brings scraps of town news, how the church group's cookies turned out, how the pastor's dog chased its own tail again, and how an 85-year-old woman just learned to video call her niece. I don't laugh out loud, but I feel warm. Sometimes I see Owen at the pharmacy, at the grocery store, or just passing on the sidewalk. We don't say much, just a nod. I don't blame him anymore. I no longer wait for an apology. I've come to believe that some wounds don't need touching to heal. They just need us to stop rubbing salt into them. The hardest lesson I learned, and I learned it late, was that I have the right to walk away from a life that wears me down. Even if that life is called family. Maybe I spent too many years in silence thinking patience was love and sacrifice was what mothers were supposed to do. But no one can keep living by erasing themselves from their own story. One time, a little girl from the reading club at the center asked me, "Do you miss your old house?" I told her, "I didn't leave a house. I just chose to build a different one no one can take from me. I don't expect anyone to remember my name. I just hope that one day when someone sits on the porch bench at the community center, they feel peace. And if one person, just one, looks up at that roof and feels their heart settle a little, then everything I did, everything I let go, everything I once endured in silence will have meant something." You see, sometimes we don't need to win. Sometimes just being able to stand tall in a place of your own, without asking, without bowing, is its own way of coming back.